Hey, welcome back everybody. Over the past few sessions, we've been talking about your family, my family, everybody's family, and that there are a lot of things that make our families different, but there are so many things that are similar about our families. And we put it like this over the past few weeks. One, when it comes to family, love matters most. Your family is a collection of individuals, no matter who makes up what role, and we've all got individual desires, individual directions, and individual dreams. But that doesn't mean that we don't all operate in the same atmosphere of our families. So, when it comes to our personal agendas and our individual desires, dreams, and directions, love matters most. We've also said that your family matters to God. Yeah, we're all individuals, but inside of our families, we're all fractured to some degree. Some people may have a compound break and there's blood and it's really nasty, but for some people, it's really not that obvious. There's things about our family that we would hope and is great that we don't have them showing up on Facebook. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have areas that we can change. In fact, if we're honest, there's probably some parts about it that we have tried to change. And we said this, when your family changes, your mindset matters. There's good changes and bad changes about your family. There's changes that we desire and things that we don't desire about our family to change, but they happen anyways. And when they do happen, our mindset matters. Jesus watched change. We've seen throughout the Bible that change is important. In fact, Jesus calls us to change. And when we do, how we think and what we assume matters. Now, in this last part, we want to identify one more thing that is very similar between families. It seems like it's almost a prerequisite to having a family, and it's this: the rules. Every family has a set of rules. In fact, these rules are really important. You may have them memorized just so that you could survive inside of your family. In fact, rules are so important to people's families that I can remember some of the rules that I had when I was a kid. Some of the rules were this, like 1, no swimming when mom and dad weren't home. Now that was good, that was life-saving. Or 2, don't touch the paper on Sunday before dad does. Even if you really want to get the comics out and read them, don't touch the Sunday paper. Rules were all over the place. In fact, some of them being life-saving or some of them being helpful, there are rules in everyone's family. Again, while rules are helpful or even life-saving, I have noticed something about families and rules when I was a teenager and now on the opposite side, being a dad, and it's this: bad families don't have them. People are yelling, it's wild, it's chaotic. However, good families don't need them. Good families don't need rules. Now, how you define good and bad is one thing, but bad families being the chaotic, disrespectful, yelling, disruptive, or toxic environments that some families find themselves in because maybe they just don't have rules and maybe they need them. When you watch good families, you look at it and go, man, they really don't make an emphasis on the rules. And how is it that they have such good families? And I think the balance with good families and bad families in rules comes down to some simple truths like this one here. Rules actually drive people apart, but they never tell us the way back. When you break a rule, it drives a wedge between you and other people, especially the person who has instituted the rule. Don't touch the paper before dad touches it on Sunday. And if you do, it drives a wedge between you and dad. You broke something, and now it's got to be fixed. But the rule only tells you what you've broke, not the way back. And so rules have dramatic limitations. Now, what's great for us is this isn't a new problem. In fact, there's already a solution for this because the way God operates his family has rules in mind and knows about their limitations. Now, that may come as a surprise to you that God's focus isn't on the rules for his family. That may even sound wrong, but I'm going to read a couple of verses here and we're going to look at something that shows exactly how God sees rules and their limitations. In Galatians 4, we're going to hear the author talk to a group of people who have spent their lives trying to keep the rules just to keep God happy. And their life struggle of not being able to live up to those rules and not sure how to go forward. And when Jesus enters the picture, Paul, the author of Galatians, talks about exactly where Jesus leaves us with God and the rules. And he says this: but when the set time had fully come, we're not really sure exactly what the set time was or what the parameters were that made God's decision there, but it was the right time for God to send his son, Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law. Now, he's making a distinction here. He's drawing your attention to the fact that he had sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to highlight this. Jesus was born as a human, just like you and I are, under the law, just like the people around him were. So he had to follow that law if he was a human. And that's exactly what he did for a purpose. In fact, the only way for him to redeem us was for him to follow the law. Now, redeem's a funny word. For us, we probably don't use this word too much to redeem. Maybe to redeem a gift card, but in this instance, it's to rescue from the power of someone or something else. And so what this word sometimes is translated as is ransom. What Jesus did as born under a woman, born under the law, is that he ransomed those who were under the law. And the only way that he was able to do that was to be under the law, follow it perfectly, every rule, every day, until he was killed wrongly, and then came back from the dead permanently. And when he did that, he was able to buy us back, to ransom us, or to redeem us from the rules, the law, which is what everybody had to follow. And when you and I break those rules, when we tell a lie, when we steal, we are condemned by that law. And our only way out is for Jesus, who was human, who was born under the rules just like you and me, to buy people back. And when Jesus did this, when he redeemed us, he didn't just redeem us from the rules so that we could follow the rules. In fact, Jesus followed all of the rules every day to put an end to that, to give us something better. And this is what it says in the next part. Those under the law, that we might receive an adoption to sonship. Now, this is like a legalese way to say being adopted into somebody's family. And sonship, if you're a girl or a woman, you're sitting there going, well, what about daughtership? The idea here is that we went from somebody outside of the family to somebody inside of the family, and Jesus did that for us. We were brought in. In an adoption, you don't just have a family bringing in a daughter or a son. You have a person who becomes a daughter and a son and gains a family. And that's what you and I have. In fact, we don't just get a freedom from rules, we get a freedom to something else. We get freedom to have a relationship. And this is exactly what God believes about family, about relationships, and the way he operates in them. One of which is relationships are greater than rules. While rules show us what we've done wrong and drive us apart from people, they can't show us the way back. The way back is relationship. And God knew that. And that's why God sent his son to follow all of the rules, to give us and provide for us a relationship. Now, the great part is when we trust Jesus and we have a relationship with him, we have a relationship with God, which means we are inside his family. We've received an adoption into his family. Once we were outside, and now we're inside with him. And that provides us with something. In fact, if you're a part of God's family, Paul, the author, shows you exactly what you get in that relationship. And it says this: because you are his sons, you've received an adoption into his family, God sent the Spirit of his Son, Jesus, into our hearts. And this is probably where everybody gets the idea of Jesus, I asked Jesus into my heart. That's right, God sent Jesus' Spirit into our hearts. This is where God's kingdom is, our hearts and minds, and the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. Now, if you're having heart palpitations, that is certainly not the Spirit calling out Abba, Father, or we'd all have them if we're saved. He's not talking about a physical calling out that maybe you can't even control. Abba, Father. There, I just said it. I don't know what's going on. He's not saying that. What he is saying is that when you have a relationship with him, you are drawn away from the rules and towards him. The Spirit that lives inside of us, Jesus' Spirit that lives inside of us, draws us closer to a relationship with God and away from the motivation of following the rules. Now, we don't have to live trying to just be good enough that we don't break God's rules and he still loves us. Instead, we start asking the question, how much closer can I get to God? How do I have a better relationship with God? Not just staying away from the bad. Being a follower of Jesus isn't just sin management or rules management. It's a relationship. It's being part of the family of God. In fact, that's exactly what Abba and the Father here is doing. Abba is supposed to be, almost in our language, daddy. So it's a really vulnerable, open and honest, transparent, authentic, affectionate term for God. Instead of just a master or somebody in an official position, we have a relational aspect to our life with God instead of just following the rules. And now the author kind of highlights that in this next verse, and he says this: Abba, Father, so you are no longer a slave, somebody who is compelled under punishment to follow the rules and has no future, but God's child, adoption as sons. And since you are his child, we're in his family, God has made you also an heir. In their line of work and in their family structure, a son would come of age, and then especially if you were the firstborn son, you would know that you were going to be an heir with the father. You would share all things with him. And a slave, a servant of the house, somebody who didn't belong in the family, had no hope of that. And so when we have a relationship, instead of just following the rules, we just receive something better. Not just the relationship, but also sharing all things with God. Now, I would bet in your family, if you could make the choice, you would immediately trade all of the rules you have to follow for a better relationship with your parents, a better relationship inside of your family. If we could get rid of all of the rules and lean into a relationship, things would be better. And that's why bad families have no rules, because they have all of this grace, they don't call anybody out, and it continues to damage a relationship. And this is why good families don't need them, because they emphasize such a relationship with their kids and their parents and everybody that lives in the family that the rules aren't the point anymore. In fact, that's exactly what God would say to us. It's not about just following the rules anymore. That's gone. Jesus fulfilled all of them. Now, if you love God as his child, you will fulfill the law. You will follow the rules because you love. If you don't love, you don't care about somebody else. If you don't love your parents, you don't care about them. So you'll continue to break rules because the rules were never the point anyways to you. And that's exactly what God has for us, a relationship with him that gives us a future. And so ultimately, at the end of this entire discussion, after all of these sessions, belonging to God's family matters, because it will redefine how you see your family. It'll redefine how you see the relationships in your house. It'll redefine not just how to make your family good for good's sake, but because if you're a part of God's family, it reorganizes exactly how you operate in your family. Not just following the rules or being good, but trusting Jesus as your only way to God, and how that affects every day of your life. Now, if you're already in God's family and you only focus on the rules, you will miss the point of being in God's family. You could follow all of the rules and have a very shallow relationship with him. In fact, that's what God's asking you to not do, is focus on the rules. What he is saying is, now that you're part of my family, focus on me and you, the relationship that we have. If you miss that and you focus the rest of your life on following the rules and being a good person, you will miss what Jesus called especially for us, being a part of his family and having a relationship with him. Now imagine if we had in our families and in our own lives a culture of Christians, a church, a gathering of believers who, instead of focusing on the rules and calling each other out for all of the rules that we're breaking, we focused on grace. We focused on our identity as God's children. We focused on the fact that we're all part of God's family. Could you imagine what it would look like to the world around us? A world that has broken families, a world that has no idea what to do with the tension and the fractures they find in their families, a world that looks at families and even devalues them in this time. Could you imagine what they would find? They would find a gathering of believers that are identified and characterized by love. Now, if you're not part of God's family, then forget about your own family for a minute. You've got a bigger problem, and that is being on the outside of God's family. You have no hope for a future. But if you can trust Jesus as your future, as your present, then you can find security in God's family. You can find a ransom from the power of sin, death, and hell, Satan, demons, and a horrible future ahead, and be a part of something that is permanent, eternal, forever, and godly. Now, if you're already part of God's family, this is easy. Turn to the family that you have and emphasize the love that Jesus gave to you. At the end of the day, guys, family matters. I hope this has been a challenging and encouraging series for us. And when you're tempted to count your family out, or maybe yourself out of your family, love matters most, because your family matters to God.